Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Paul Harris and I am president of the City Club's Board of Directors. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Steve Taylor, director of Cleveland Metroparks Zoo. First, a brief bit of history. The Cleveland Zoo opened in 1882 at a location near Wade Oval in Cleveland's University Circle. In 1907, the Cleveland City Council determined to move the zoo to its current location on the west side of Cleveland. In 1940, one of the first large animals came to the zoo, an Asian elephant, affectionately known as Frida. Some of you may remember Frida. That is an interesting and relevant historical fact in relation to exciting current developments at the zoo. Cleveland Metroparks assumed responsibility for the zoo in 1975. Mr. Taylor has led the zoo since 1989 and has overseen a period of expansion with award-winning exhibits and the achievement of national prominence. His remarks today on a local zoo with global reach underscore the zoo's relevance and connectivity beyond Cleveland. Mr. Taylor was born in Inglewood, California. He earned his bachelor's degree in biology from the University of California, Irvine, and attended graduate school at Long Beach State University and Golden Gate University. He began his zoo career as an animal keeper in Los Angeles and subsequently served as director of the Sacramento Zoo and oversaw an expansion in the Sacramento Zoo's exhibits and attendance. Since assuming the head position at Cleveland Metroparks Zoo in January of 1989, Mr. Taylor has, as previously noted, overseen significant expansion as well as a growth in attendance, which now exceeds over 1 million visitors annually. Exhibits opened under Mr. Taylor's leadership include the Rainforest in 1992, Wolf Wilderness in 1997, Australian Adventure in 2000, and the Sarah Ellison Steffi Center for Zoological Medicine in 2004. Like the zoo he oversees, Mr. Taylor has had a global reach, having been part of or led delegations to China, Ecuador, Galapagos, Costa Rica, Belize, South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Namibia, probably among other places. He has been active in professional associations, having served as a member and president of the board of directors for the associations of zoos and aquariums. His current associations include membership on the board of the Wilds, a wildlife conservation center in Central Ohio, membership in the Organization of World Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and service as a director of Positively Cleveland. I'm very pleased to present on behalf of the City Club of Cleveland, Steve Taylor, director of Cleveland Metroparks Zoo.
Thank you, Paul, and thank all of you for coming. It's nice to see so many friends out here. I thank Paul for giving you a little bit of my background. It has been a great ride. I've been one of these fortunate people that knew what I wanted to do from almost the minute I was born. I remember in the 6th grade doing a report on being a zoologist. And you couldn't find much information, so I think whatever I wrote, the teacher would have accepted. You could find it on lawyers or taxi drivers, but not being a zoologist. I've had a great career. I was a children's zoo manager in San Francisco. I know some people out there think San Francisco Zoo is sort of a redundant statement, but it was a great job, and I actually lived in the zoo. And occasionally I'd have to come and chase some vandals out of the zoo, and I had 2 collies that lived with me. And I learned after the first time I chased some vandals that you don't chase vandals with collies named Shirley and Lassie. So I changed their names to Hank to Tank and Ruffian or something, and it scared people a little bit more. But I've had a great career, and it's really, as I say, it's really my hobby that's just got terribly out of hand. I thank you. I was at the City Club, gave a talk similar to this in January of 1997, and talked about all the things that have changed in the zoo profession. I think one of the most outstanding is what how keepers have evolved over the years. We have about 53 animal keepers. Most of them now, or all of them, have college degrees. Some have master's degrees. But I'm reminded, and I told the story in '97, of when I started, and I was a college graduate, and I was taking notes. I was trying to learn everything I could about animals, and some of the old keepers weren't in that frame, if we say. And one great guy, been there a long time, is named Don Fuller. I don't think he could even read or write, but he was a wonderful man. But one day, it was like 2 weeks on the job, and I was so excited, and I came in, and Don was making this meal for an animal, and it had, sweet potatoes in it, and bananas, and monkey chow, and crickets, all kinds of stuff in there. And I said, Don, what are you feeding? And I swear Don said this statement. He says, I don't know what they call it, I just know what it eats. And But our keepers have changed over the years, and as I said, the other thing that's changed, when I was here in '97, we talked about a beginning of a conservation and science department in our zoo, and we had one scientist on an IMLS grant. Now we have 5 scientists in that position, and so things have changed. When I was here in 1997, there were 175 accredited zoos in the United States. Those are zoos that go through much of an inspection and are part of the AZA. And now there are about 224 accredited zoos and aquariums. So the business has grown. So why do we still need zoos and aquariums, and why am I so excited about being involved with zoos and aquariums? The first is because we're popular. The 700 million people go to zoos every year worldwide, and around 170 million in the United States go to our accredited zoos and aquariums, and that's more than Major League Baseball, football, and basketball combined. We're very popular. And why are we popular? It's the animals, stupid. There's a night when there was a little girl looking into elephants in our old exhibit. And I remember very distinctly she was with her mother, and she was staring at the elephants, and she was mesmerized by these absolutely outstanding animals. The mother got impatient. Come on, Susie, we'll just call her Susie. Come on, Susie, we got to go home, we got to go home. A half an hour this little girl was watching our elephants. Finally, the mother says, come on, we've got to go home. You can see elephants anytime you want on TV and in your books and on our videos. The little girl looks up to her mother and says, yeah, but they're not this big. And that's one of the reasons we have zoo. Or how about a little girl named Carolyn Jackson, who worked, kind of volunteered or spent a lot of time around. She was a little girl at the London Zoo, and she was contributing her pennies to a really worthwhile organization called the Cheetah Conservation Fund, run by Laurie Marker in Namibia. And her mother says, why do you keep raising money for these cheetahs? And I think she correctly stated it. She said, if I wait till I'm an adult, cheetahs may be extinct. And that's why we have to do things now. And for years we used to talk about, boy, the world is going to be under great hands with our children. But if we screw it up so bad that we lose some of these animals, I think it will be too late. Or how about Lauren and Steve Spillman, who are donors to our African elephant crossing, and named one of our buildings after Lauren's mother, Sidale Miller. And Lauren said this, it was an amazing opportunity to honor her. She has great pride in her memories of bringing me and my sister to the zoo, and now able to bring her grandchildren. Her favorite have always been the elephants, and we appreciate that. The other one great thing, and some of them are out here, one of the things that in my almost 40 years about working in zoos is so great, and that's the passionate and dedicated staff. And there are so many stories I could tell. I'm stealing one from Dr. Chris Kuhar, who's our wonderful primate curator, that he tells at Animal Attractions that I think shows some dedication of staff. And this is about when he worked at Disney's Animal Kingdom. Disney's Animal Kingdom had to occasionally collect semen from their bull elephant. You're starting to think of dedication here. Okay, good. It's really a thing. It's really a teamwork. It's really teamwork. One job is with somebody with a long, fairly narrow arm, wearing a raincoat, or as Chris would call it, a giant condom. Anyway, has to reach up in the rear end and stimulate the prostate. The other job, just as glamorous, is the catcher. Okay? This happened to be a young lady who was also there with a sterilized plastic bag, and that was her job, to be a catcher. Well, as you can imagine, everything could go very, very easy, everything could go right, or maybe it could go wrong. And as you might imagine, the elephant could have sort of a spasm, and that elephant did, and that elephant's organ just whapped her in the face and gave her a black eye. A hell of a shiner. That's not the end of the story. That young lady was getting married that weekend. She had to go to her wedding and explain to poor Aunt Millie from Duluth about how she got this black eye. And there are many stories like that of dedicated staff and what they do to help wildlife and wild places. But why do we like zoos? And again, it's the animals. And there's some, I could tell you 100 orang stories. I'll just do 2 briefly. We had an orangutan named Jonathan. Jonathan actually grew up in the LA Zoo, went to the, he went to Topeka, and then Buffalo, and then Cleveland. And I actually went from Los Angeles to San Francisco, Sacramento to Cleveland. Anyway, we ended up in Cleveland together. But when he was young, very young, actually 3 years, I took care of him along with other keepers. I remember one time we had to do something to him, some test, and it took 5 of us to hold down a 3-year-old orangutan. He grew up. He went into the main zoo, and I was also occasionally to take care of him. When he was only 5, you could still go in with Jonathan. And so I happened to be on that area that one day, and some people came running up to me and said, "You got to do something, you got to do something. Jonathan, that orangutan has a big bolt. He might swallow it." Well, they're pretty smart. They're not going to swallow it, but we have to be nice to the public. And so I said, "Okay, I'll take care of it." So I ran around to the back, and orangutans, you can trade to get things from orangutans. So I took some grapes to get this bolt, and I go in there, and I grab Jonathan, and I look, and he puts his lip out, and there's nothing. I'm going, what happened? I look around, and these people had the bolt, and they knocked it on the glass, and said, what happened? What happened? He said, he saw you coming, and he threw it over the top. But my very favorite orangutan story, true story, happened in Louisville, Kentucky. They had a brand new orangutan exhibit. And like most orangutan exhibits or great ape exhibits, there are myriad of cages in the back. And the orangutans can go in various different places, and you can put them where they want to. And there's keeper areas, offices, and laboratories, whatever. And the orangs kind of watch the keepers sometime. They had one area where they had a washer and dryer, so they watched that, and they watched everything. Well, about 2 years after this exhibit was developed, somebody left the lock off in the back. And the orangutans got out in the back area. They had been watching keepers do laundry for 2 years. They knew exactly what to do, almost. They knew to open it. They knew to put laundry in it. They put the laundry in. They knew all that. They knew which dials to turn. One thing this female orangutan did wrong. She didn't just put a cup of soap in. She put the whole damn box of soap in. Started up the laundry. They came in, the keepers came in at 7 in the morning the next day, and there was suds, up to here. And this little orangutan's head looking around like this. But orangutans, again, are very important. Most important thing that I think that keeps us involved in zoos is our conservation mission. Worldwide, zoos raise about $350 million a year for conservation we'll call outside our walls, where we support scientists, our own staff, in doing important conservation work. That's right up there almost with World Wildlife Fund and the Nature Conservancy. And we do a lot of interesting programs, and some of them I'm sure you know about. For instance, in 1987, there were only 22 California condors in the Los Angeles and the San Diego zoos. And by a couple of years ago, several zoos have been taking place in this, as is our national government, and there was about 350 California condors in zoo, 150 of which have been released back into the wild areas of California and Mexico. We've done that with Arabian oryx, we've done it with black-footed ferrets, we've done it with golden lion tamarins, but we can't do it with all the animals in the world. There's just too many animals, and these programs are expensive. Nonetheless, it's important tools, and it's a tool that only zoos can be involved with, and I think we have a very important role in that. But we also have an important role to make sure these animals stay in the wild and are protected in the wild. And one of the programs I'm most happy that we support through funds from the Cleveland Zoological Society is the support of Charles Foley in Tarangire Park in Tanzania. And I visited that park several times. And Charles is a Brit, educated at Princeton's, married an American wife, and they have 2 lovely children, and they live pretty much full-time in Tanzania. And he's been studying these elephants, about 750 elephants, which they know in Tarangire National Park. He's been studying them for about 25 years. And he's learned some incredible things and that he's found. He found one time when they had a drought in the 90s, many of the calves and even some of the adults died. And he divided them into 2 categories. You know, elephants work in matriarchal herds. In other words, the female, the oldest, usually the oldest and the strongest female is in charge. And he found out that there were 2 groups, the ones that mostly survived and ones that most of the calves died. And it turns out it was the ones that had the older females, the females above 50, that survived. And he surmises, which I'm sure is correct, those animals remembered the drought in the 50s. And those ones that had the older females were able to go and find water and come back and survive. So there's lots of things that we need to learn. And Charles' work is great because at one time in this national park there were 9 corridors in and out of Tarangire National Park, and now there are 4. And he's working with the local communities so those animals can still migrate. So what's so great about your own Cleveland Metroparks Zoo? Well, as it was explained, it's one of the oldest institutions here, started in 1882. It's got an incredible set of governance run by Cleveland Metroparks, as we were explained, really saved the zoo, gives us broad-based support, not just city or not just zoo society, and supported by the Cleveland Zoological Society, which, for instance, is just about raised all the $12.5 million for their half of the elephant project. I don't know which half they're going to get, but half of the elephant project. And so it's a great partnership, and it's one that's an envy of most of the zoos around the country. We also have this tremendous commitment to quality. When I got here, Fred Rzepka was a commissioner, Vern Hartenberg was the executive director, and we had some challenges with the rainforest. Some of you remember some of those challenges, but they were committed to making it a quality new exhibit. And it took us from having 700, 800,000 guests to 1.3, 1.4 million guests, and it gave us our first really major exhibit. And I'm proud to say that that's continued with commissioners. Our new executive director, Brian's there. New park commissioners are still committed to this great sense of quality. Our zoo is also committed to great programs for animal welfare. We have a wonderful hospital, the Sarah Allison Steffi Center for Zoological Medicine. We had an old hippo, Blackie, and Blackie we wanted to build an exhibit for. We didn't quite have enough money. We wanted to do the elephants, but just a blink of an eye, we built probably $300,000 retirement condominium for Blackie. He's the 2nd oldest hippo in the United States, and we wanted to make sure he had a good life. Our commitment to conservation education is outstanding. The zoo, for many years, for just one program, has had a bus. The buses, now we have 2, thanks again to the Zoological Society, that go and pick up children and bring them to the zoo. We go to schools, we pick up the students, we bring them to the zoo for free, and even the Zoo Society has raised funds to give them lunch. So that's a tremendous program that we do for our community, and I could go on. We also, as you started to hear, we have this tremendous commitment to conservation programs. I've told this story, and most of you out there know, but I'll just tell it because I think it represents some of the ways we conserve animals, and that's the Timmy story. So I got here 20-some years ago, and we had a lone gorilla named Timmy. And gorillas shouldn't be by themselves, although Timmy had a reputation as sort of a wife beater, if you will, and not a very nice gorilla. But we found a female that we thought he'd be compatible with. Her name was Cribby Kate. And we brought Timmy and Cribby Kate together, and they got along. They were, compatible. I don't know that they were in love, like some people said, but anyway, they were very compatible. And what happened is, as we looked at it, we'd have these committees called SSPs, Species Survival Plans. And the sort of owning institutions elect a group, and they decide how we should manage, say, gorillas. Right now, the head of that, the chairman of the gorilla SSP is Dr. Kristen Lucas, and but she wasn't head of it then. But anyway, we were looking at gorillas and said, well, Timmy seems to be an okay gorilla. His genes are not represented in our genetic makeup of our North American gorillas, so let's send him somewhere where he can breed. And we said, well, Timmy's kind of popular here, but it's the right thing to do, so let's do it. And eventually I was sort of misquoted in the paper, and all hell broke loose, and there were signs, "Send Taylor, not Timmy," and an animal rights group took us to court, and our attorneys, there's a table down here, our attorneys did a very smart thing. They got that put into a federal court, which was really a no-nonsense court. Judge Batchelder, 7:30 in the morning on Halloween in 1991. We were in federal court, and after a little bit of testimony, Judge Batchelder said, "You know, I might not do this, but because of the way the Endangered Species Act is written, the zoo may send its gorilla to New York." So that day, 4 keepers, 2 veterinarians, 2 mechanics, a handyman, 4 drivers took Timmy to the Bronx Zoo in New York, and he got there safely, which we all assumed he'd get there safely. There were a lot of things he was too old to move, but we knew he'd get there safely. What we didn't know is how successful he would be. He got along with all the other gorillas, the babies, the females, etc. He eventually sired 13 offspring. So his genes are well represented in our population. So I could go on about our conservation programs. We have a program for Great Plains garter snakes locally, Blanding's turtles. We have a tremendous sustainability program of recycling. Our new African elephant crossing is a LEED building, and we believe it's the first LEED building, environmental building, green building, if you will, in any zoo in the United States that's just for animals. There's been a lot of office buildings and education centers, but the African elephant crossing could be the first LEED certified building. So what are the 3 milestones in the recent zoo's history? And I think there are 3 really important things in the recent history of our zoo. First, we've talked a little bit about, and that's Metroparks taking over the zoo in 1975. The second, I believe, was the opening of the rainforest that gave us a really a new modern exhibit. And the third is right now, the opening of the African elephant crossing, which will open on May 5th. And a little bit of story, again, of staff dedication. You know, we had to move our elephants to Columbus for 2 years while we were under construction. And that also shows how zoos cooperate with each other. But we also, our keepers, volunteered, disrupt their life, and move down to Columbus for 2 years to take care of their animals. And that's really dedication. We rented them an apartment and everything, but they stayed there. And so it's a wonderful new exhibit. It's got some features that are really unique. We can have everything from the cutest little elephant calf in it to the meanest ass bull elephant you'll ever see. We can have 7, 8 animals. We can have families of elephants. We can have single animals. We have an area that they can go outside even in the winter that's sheltered and heated. We have sand in their stalls, so if they're indoors for long periods of time, they can dig in the sand. They got many things for them to do, from waterfalls to rivers to digging for a salt block, because we will never be able to duplicate the wild. If it's leafcutter ants or golden lion tamarins or elephants, we'll never have an area as big as the wild. But we take care of our animals, and we make sure they have everything they need in a restricted space. So it's not just the hardware, how big it is, but it's also the software and how we work with the animals and keep them healthy while they're in the zoo. So it will be a unique exhibit, and I hope all of you are able to come out and see this magnificent exhibit after May. I want to end my little presentation here with a quote. A great mentor of mine and one of the all-time great zoo directors of all time, Bill Conway, was a great writer, and he wrote several wonderful articles on zoos and conservation. One time he even wrote an article about building a bullfrog exhibit, and his concept there was you can make any animal sound exciting, and you can do any wonderful things with any kind of animal. But he did it in a very unique way. He did it with the zoo director talking to the devil, which probably happens every day, but in his case, he wanted to do that. And so, after 30 years later, we told Bill, you got to reinvent that. That was such a clever thing. So he did it again. And we're talking about zoos and particularly the growth of zoos and how zoos have changed. And I just want to read the end of his article, if I may. He called the devil M. Straightening his long red cape, M reflected. AZA zoos have reached a tipping point. The disappearance of wildlife is altering the basic context in which zoos were conceived. They are destined to become community-based wildlife conservation organizations. All the main elements are now in place. Dedicated public support and attendance, unique accreditation program, a flowering of science, research, and education, a growing multinational in situ, in the wild, conservation program, and a nascent, I had to look that, he always used different words, I had to look that up. That just means coming to be. So a nascent but expanding rare species breeding effort based on the SSP, as I explained with Timmy. This adds up to an unparalleled potential to become the 21st century conservation engine, buying time and sowing seeds for wildlife survival and public support, the exhibition of vanishing species. The stakes could not be higher. Well, just one more question I asked the grouchy M. How in the hell did the devil become interested in zoos? Oh, for me, it was just a hobby, M replied. Working with animals is such a relief. They are never judgmental, you know. Of course, hell's own animal care has technical issues. Salamanders don't really like fire and brimstone. The zoo staff reception requires time. I don't know about this, but there are scores of zoo directors and trustees going to hell, but very few curators and almost no keepers. Nonetheless, when I heard that the Tasmanian devil and the hellbenders were threatened, the challenge of vanishing species extinction became personal. Unlike hell and purgatory, M went on wistfully, zoos are getting much better, but nature and wildlife is terribly ill. Zoo exhibition is easy, wildlife preservation is hard, very hard. Nevertheless, zoos working together can buy time for endless forms of the beautiful and most wonderful that will otherwise be lost. Exhibiting vanishing species will always be hell, but zoos and zoo people are perceived with growing hope and esteem. Clearly, they are approaching their finest hour. And with that, M drifted away. So, yeah, and I believe that the devil and I have one more thing in common, that we both believe that zoos are approaching their finest hour. So thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a Friday forum featuring Steve Taylor, Director of Cleveland Metroparks Zoo. We'll return to Mr. Taylor in a moment for our traditional City Club questions. We'd ask that you start formulating your questions now, and also respectfully ask that you keep them brief and to the point so we can get as many questions in as possible. Members and guests alike are welcome to attend City Club forums, and we certainly hope that everyone listening will join the City Club and become active in our ongoing civic dialogue. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC, and our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. We are very pleased to welcome guests at tables today hosted by the law firm Baker & Hostetler, the Cleveland Metroparks Zoo, and the Cleveland Zoological Society. Thank you all for joining us today. Today's program is the George S. Dively Memorial Forum on Cleveland's Tomorrow, made possible by a generous gift from the George S. Dively Foundation in memory of Mr. Dively. Joining us at the head table today is Paul Brentlinger. Mr. Brentlinger, will you please stand and be recognized? Thank you very much for your support. Now it's time to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today are City Club Marketing and Membership Manager Heather Sikora and City Club Program Director Carrie Miller. First question, please.
Mr. Taylor, I don't know if you have the expertise or knowledge, but I would like to ask you, do you know how various forms of life live on different foods? How can a herbivorous
animal... Where's my curator?
I don't understand how metabolism works. We human beings are omnivorous. and there's so many animals that are herbivorous. Others live on just carnivorous foods. I don't
understand it either. It's amazing. Well, I don't think there's a short answer.
Stumped you.
I think you've stumped me. I mean, there's no short answer. It's obvious that animals have evolved to get nutrition from different kinds of food sources. And obviously, if we all ate exactly the same thing, there wouldn't be the diversity of life we have, which is advantageous biologically. So you've got to have different kinds of food. I mean, the most bizarre, if you come to our Australia section and see koalas. We couldn't live ourselves by eating eucalyptus leaves. In fact, they're poisonous to us. But the koala can do it. I won't go into eating live rats or whatever it is, but everything has a different food source and is able to get energy so it can grow and reproduce, because that's the whole important part of being a living being. You've got to grow and you've got to reproduce so your species will survive. And somehow through the evolutionary process, different animals have been managed to get energy from different types of foods. That's about what I can answer about that.
Zoos have come a long way from when the animals were all in cages to the habitats that you see now. But I imagine the best habitat for some animals would be a wide open area far away from people. What kind of thought processes and planning issues are there in designing habitats where people can still go to the zoo and have a good view of the animals?
Yeah, it's a complicated one, and all these people at this back table participate in it, whether it's at our zoo or another zoo. And so if you're designing an exhibit, you have to make it for the animals, you have to make it for your guests, and also safe for the keepers. So there's three components, and sometimes they conflict with each other. I could use a couple of great examples in our zoo, but I think Wolf Wilderness, that many of you know, is one of the better ones. It's big enough so the animals can move around, they can be in a social group, but it's designed in such a way on a hillside and with one-way windows that the public can actually see the animals. And it's a 4 seasons exhibit because it looks great in the winter, it looks great in the summer, and it's got some special features so that the keepers that take care of those animals are safe. So, but it is a problem, and it's illustrated by 2 emails I can get in the same day. That one is a complaint and one is a congratulatory email. And one says, you know, I love the Cleveland Metroparks Zoo. It's very open. We have to walk a ways and to see animals, and they're all in their natural habitats, and it's just a wonderful zoo. The next one says the same thing. I hate the zoo. We have to walk all over. The animals have so much room, we can't see them. And so what we do is try to get a compromise between those two guests that have different expectations of our zoo.
It's been a long time since I've been able to take kids to an aquarium in this area. What's the future hold?
Well, you know what I know. It's in the paper that, and some of our staff have had some meetings, but they're building an aquarium in the west bank of the flats. It's a for-profit aquarium, as I understand it. There's a company that's done quite a few aquariums in Australia and Europe. This is their first attempt at doing one in America. I'm sure that's going to be a challenge for them. I'm glad it's a for-profit aquarium. I think any of my nonprofit colleagues out there would say we probably don't need another attraction in Cleveland that really fights for the resources we have with our donors and sponsors. We've got, I mean, this community is incredible. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Science Center, everything in University Circle, the Playhouse. I mean, we got so much in this community, and we all have to make sure we come downtown and support the City Club and all these things, or we're not going to have them. So I'm glad it's a for-profit, because if it was a nonprofit, they might be after some of our donors and things like that. So we'll just have to see. It's supposed to be done this year. And I'm not sure if it's 30,000 square feet or 70 when it opens, but they've talked a lot about it. And I know the rainforest is almost 90,000 square feet. I'm jealous of aquariums in some way, too, because even a small aquarium charges sometimes $25, and we're right now at $11 for an adult. Aquariums have always been able to charge more for some reason, because it's an hour visit. The zoo's a 6-hour visit, but it has to do with, I think, our history. Zoos were always kind of a poor part of a park and recreation department, and some of them were free, so we've never been able to get our price up for what it really is worth. But I think you'll have a chance. I know I'll be first in line to see the new aquarium.
You mentioned the 3 major milestones in the history of the zoo. What do you see as the next 3 major milestones that you envision for the zoo?
Well, obviously it'll be some kind of exhibit. I think it'll also be maybe some new ways to fund our operation, as we all, particularly these last few years, understand that even government funding is going to be less and less, and how do we find ways to make our zoos still viable and continue. I mean, we have $150 million site. I mean, that's what our facilities are worth, and we need to spend probably $3 million a year just maintaining the asphalt and the roofs and the boilers, not to mention new exhibits. So finding new sources of things. I hope we build a new sea lion exhibit. I hope we do a really probably the best gorilla exhibit in the country. I hope we be able to expand our education programs with new facilities. We'll get people like this here to come down to our zoo to rent facilities, and we're only 3.5 miles from here, so we'll probably be vying with the aquarium for groups to come to the zoo and have meetings, etc. So I think that's some of the things that could happen. We're working on a strategic plan right now. We've just about sort of chosen the next project. We have a lot of small projects, but we'll certainly won't sit here after the elephant exhibit is done and don't do anything for 10 years.
Taylor, Tim Ferriss from Brooklyn Center on your northern boundary. Sure. We understand that the Zoo program has been wildly successful the past couple of years, and that as a matter of fact, this commodity has sold out within days or perhaps hours of being released. First of all, tell us a little bit about the program, what it's done for the zoo, and second, when the elephants come back, will the commodity last longer on the market?
Very good question. Yeah, we've had a compost. We've had, as I said, we have a very good sustainability program with everything from light bulbs to aluminum to whatever. And we do compost a lot of our hoof stock, particularly elephant waste, and some leaves are in it, etc. And we can do about 1/3 of ours right now in the site we have. What happens right now, we have a site that's only so big, so we can only, it's called width rows, and it has to go through almost a year cycle to be really good compost. And that's why if you go to our zoo, we have the biggest flowers than around, it's because we use this compost, but we also sell some of it. So we're looking now at some kind of containers so we can do the same kind of composting but in much less space. Or we're looking for more space to spread out our compost, because we can only do about 1/3 of what we have, and we know there's a market for it because, as you said, our zoo poo, if you will, when we do sell it twice a year, it sells out pretty quickly. So it's one of many sustainability projects, and I suppose back to answering the question here, what's the next milestone? It will be our sustainability efforts, whether it's solar panels or wind or whatever. Really, one, so that we can conserve energy, but two, that we can be a demonstration garden, if you will, for all the people that are interested in sustainability. So anyway, we hope to expand that program. Thank you.
I want to say that I really enjoyed the zoo just this week, Tuesday, to take a walk with my wife, and it's a great place to get an exercise. While walking, I noticed some small things you were doing that I want to compliment you on, and that's tying in the pedestrian bridge that's under the Fulton Parkway Bridge that mirrors it. That's a lovely touch. And then I noticed you're building a small grill there under the bridge that hopefully will do a good job at selling to its visitors. We noticed a couple of things. One was that because of the weather, the big animals weren't out, things like the giraffes, and your elephants obviously weren't out. But there were a lot of birds hanging around, including some vultures, who may be temporary visitors, I assume, not permanent exhibit. And I wanted to know, since you don't have the bird building anymore, you have a couple of enclosed cages, but you try to do some bird stuff. What are you doing to encourage birds and have them as part of the exhibit? And is there anything you'd like to have that you don't have now?
Oh, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of questions there, but there's a lot of things I'd like to have that we don't have now. One would be certainly more indoor space. We've tried, other than the real most parts of the winter where we have a different fee structure, and because some of the things aren't out. Now, the giraffes, it's not so much the cold, it's if it gets wet and slippery, you don't want a giraffe to slip. A lot of times they're out, but if it's really wet, they're not. But there's a way that people can go into the back of the barn and look at giraffes, the same with our rhinos and things like that. Animals are pretty tolerant of a lot of temperatures, but slipping is an issue. Yes, in regard to birds, we'd like to expand our birds. We have that wonderful lorikeet aviary in Australia. We have a few other. We have a lot of waterfowl. We're developing that question. When we open the African elephant crossing, we have a aviary that's going to have about 40 African birds in it. Again, kind of like you're saying, you might not see them, but we're doing our bird aviaries a little different than we used to. In other words, if we build an aviary, we also build its winter holding adjacent. So if it's a nice day, they can go out, but they can always get back in. So that's some of the things. But I think long term, you'll see a few more birds, maybe some kind of a indoor bird area, but more likely we'll have birds, Australian birds in Australia and Africa birds in Africa, and some of them we'd like to have their holding right next to their exhibit. One that we don't have that we really need to do is on Waterfowl Lake, we keep our Chilean flamingos, and we have to take them completely away to a building up, half a mile away, where if we had the building right next to that lake on nice days, we could let them out more often. So they'd only be probably locked up maybe 90 days instead of, we got to make sure the weather has changed. They came out about 2 weeks ago, and now we'll stay out the whole season. But thank you, yeah. When we took down the birdhouse, we did lose in fact, the animal that's asked the most in our surveys that people would like to see they'd like to see is penguins. And we don't have penguins at this time.
Mr. Taylor, do you have a preventive medicine program at the zoo? And if so, how does it function? How do you get the animals to cooperate?
Yeah, well, sometimes the animals don't have choices. We have these things called tranquilizer guns, and have a very good vet staff. And yes, we have a fairly comprehensive, and it's really a question for one of our veterinarians, but obviously the keepers get stool samples, and we check for parasites on a regular basis. Most animals probably twice a year. We TB test our animals that are susceptible to TB. Most of the animals we see regularly, once a year. Some zoos don't do that. I mean, some zoos, for instance, particularly when I was a keeper, our director at that time in Los Angeles said, you never knock down a great ape, because why tranquilization is pretty well perfected, you could lose an animal. And it would never knock down, because he felt they were so valuable, you couldn't just knock down a great ape. But most of our animals we see on a regular basis, and do a preventive maintenance program for all of them. Again, some have to be tranquilized, some we just bring in, or some for instance, the giraffes and the elephants all have a restraining chute, and our animals are trained to go in that chute, and we can squeeze in walls, and we don't have to tranquilize them, and et cetera. And any time an animal goes in and or out of the zoo, it's quarantined, and whatever. Sometimes if it goes out of a zoo, that zoo that's receiving it will want certain tests. There's certain tests required by law to go across state lines, and so we do a lot of testing there too. Very important to do a lot of preventive medicine. Like with us, it prevents the other kind of medicine.
Great presentation. Love your enthusiasm. And my grandson still remembers his trip to the zoo last summer.
All right.
He's 2 years old. What kind of academic curriculum would you advise kids who want to go into?
A 2-year-old?
Yeah. I want to get them ready. But there are others too. Is there a special curriculum for zookeepers and zoo managers?
There are actually a couple of universities that have zookeeper courses. There's one in Florida. There's more Wood or whatever out in California, and there are a couple of those. But the best way to get involved in a zoo is if you're local or you're stay in the university, make sure you get a college degree, and then when you're at, whether it's Ohio State or UCLA, wherever you are, just get involved with the zoo. Become a tram driver, work in the concessions, get to know the keepers, get to know people, and learn about that. And but do some volunteer work in a zoo or a nature center. Our keepers, for a number of reasons, we get the very best and the brightest in our zoo, and the ones that we've hired, the average, I think we just hired 3 because of the expansion of the elephant exhibit. I think the average was 10 years experience in another zoo. Sometimes because where we are, and our keepers are pretty well compensated as opposed to Florida or South Carolina, et cetera. The one thing I always talk to either parents or prospective zoo people about is not everybody can stay in one city and move up. As I said, I've been in 4 different cities, but that's pretty common. And so if you want to move up in the ranks, you might have to start somewhere that, and that you might not want to be in, and then move somewhere else. Because as a profession, there are 224 zoos, accredited zoos and aquariums in the world, and to move up the ranks, you may need to move to another city. So if you want to live in Los Angeles or you want to live in Cleveland and also advance, it's not as easy. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
First of all, I want to. Oh, you're holding it. Okay. I want to thank you for your sense of humor. So I guess we all ought to take a ride out to the zoo. Maybe we could get a little of that in us.
That's what does it.
I want to bring up a different kind of topic, but maybe you can help. As the building of homes goes further and further out, the habitat of animals is meeting those people. And frankly, there's a lot of fear about the animals that we have here that come to the door that look wonderful, but they may be very dangerous. Is there any thought of some type of an outside program for those people that have to cope with these animals, and maybe you better put them in the zoo for safety for the people?
Well, you asked the age-old question, in which there maybe is not any solution, and it is exactly what we're trying to educate people about in the African elephant crossing. If you live near our park, the deer may eat your hostas. So what? If you're in Africa and an elephant comes in and completely takes your crop away, that's a big, that's your livelihood. And so how people live with animals is a great challenge. And I mean, we see it in our own Endangered Species Act here, the people that want the wolves in Yellowstone and the ranchers that are afraid that they'll eat their sheep. And how can we compromise? And I think we've come up with a good compromise with the wolves. We have to keep them in the park where they can live a normal life. If we get a few rogue wolves that go outside the park, they probably have to be culled. So, there are zoos and there's a wild, but there isn't anymore. There's intensively managed collections where we have in zoos, and there's less intensively managed collections where we have in the Serengeti or Yellowstone. All animals, because of our population, which, by the way, is soon going to be 7 billion, right, is a challenge. But we're going to have to manage all animals, and we're going to have to use all the tools we can, all the tools in science, all the tools, financial tools we have to manage animals. But whether we like it or not, animals are going to have to be managed in some way or not. Now, we're fortunate in this community because we have Cleveland Metroparks, and it's at 22,000 acres of open space that the animals pretty well have a nice area to live in. But once they conflict with people, we have to find ways to mitigate that. That's a good question, and it's what really zoos are all about. We don't have all the answers, but often we can bring together both parties and come up with a solution.
Since there are illegal people who sell animals, what are the standards of our zoo in the purchasing of animals?
Well, we have it's part of our ethics code. All 224 accredited zoos in the United States abide by a code of professional ethics that say, you can't sell them to hunting ranches, you can't sell them. We occasionally have animals that go to private parties, but it's mostly just domestic animals or things. The 224 zoos in the United States mostly trade amongst themselves. Occasionally we'll bring in some animals from the wild or even from Europe, but we mostly just manage these populations within the 224 zoos and aquariums. So we don't need I can on one hand name the mammals in our zoo that are born in the wild. I mean, there's not that many. Most of them have been born in zoos. With birds, reptiles, and fish, it's a little different. We do import fish in particular, but always from dealers that are reputable and don't destroy the environment or destroy the coral reef. And it's very important. And if we find out somebody hasn't done that and hasn't done their homework, they can be expelled and have been expelled from the accredited AZA zoos, and we've done that before, and people have done stupid things and illegal things and been kicked out of our organization. That's why the accreditation process is very important to the United States, because it assures that we do things in an ethical manner. And even the animals that we send to another zoo, they have to sign a paper saying they will abide by the code of professional ethics. So I think we do everything we can to make sure the animals don't fall in the hands of people that would mistreat them.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Historically, from my own experience, I remember zoos as initially showing the visitor what the animal looked like and how it moved around. And thankfully, zoos have evolved to showing us a lot about how animals behave and how they live in their most naturally home environment that we can create. But your story about the orangutan and the washing machine and some of the other things you've told us.
Natural environment, yeah.
Well, it good point. It gets me to thinking that one of the frontiers for zoos is to help visitors begin to understand more about how animals think and feel. And that this whole sort of frontier of sentience and intelligence is a very real, unexplored, only dimly understood domain, perhaps even at the academic level. But do you think that the zoo will be able to expand the way it helps its visitors understand how your inhabitants feel and think?
Mm-hmm. Well, and there are some good techniques, and the best technique I think we have at our hand is to have people interact with our staff. So our staff can talk about, say, the elephants or the gorillas and what they have been doing. And you'll see this, I think, really in the African elephant crossing, because as I said, there's a lot of activities those elephants are doing every day led by their keepers and reward it when they behave correctly, like go through the crossing by their keepers. So certainly you'll pick up the intelligence. Most of our graphics talk about this wonderful matriarchal society where the one female is in charge and the bull just comes in and out as needed, and that's social organization. And so we have the kind of programs that talk about that. Is everybody interested as you are? Probably not. So we have to tell the basics too. And then we have a lot of education programs for adults. The Zoo Society has some wonderful behind-the-scenes tours for our Zookeeper Circle members where they really go back behind the scenes and learn from our staff some of the topics that you talked about in a little bit more detail. We also have a very good volunteer program, our docents that are out there that are also explaining things. You know, you could write graphics the size of this room and nobody would read them. And so you have to find ways to get to people, mostly through conversation and that kind of learning, and it's our best way to teach people things about animals. And certainly people like yourself can come and ask questions. That's the best way to do it. And you've asked some questions I couldn't even answer today, so I appreciate it.
Steve, I have a question regarding the future of the elephant herd here in your elephant exhibit. But first of all, I'd like to say to everyone in this room, in the first warm, sunny May day, get to see this elephant exhibit. But can you tell me some of the challenges that you see your zoo facing in getting additional elephants into your exhibit?
Thank you, John. That's a great question, and it's a complicated one. And our curator, Jeff, is here, and he could talk a couple hours on it, too. Every animal is unique in the zoo world, and our challenges are unique. Right now, quite frankly, we do not have many sustainable collections or species that are sustainable for 100 years. And that's our goal, is to have animals that we can keep in our zoo for 100 years without losing them because we have enough genetic diversity, enough numbers. Actually, elephants is one that we're very close to. But right now, because of our history with elephants in America, we weren't breeding elephants. And even when I got in the business in the early 70s, if a director wanted an elephant, he'd get on the phone and say, please send me a female elephant, and one would, for a few $1,000s, one would show up. We don't do that anymore for a lot of reasons. One is it's very expensive, and it's mostly not legal in some certain species. So we didn't breed elephants. We got together about 10 years ago or so, people stopped thinking, if we don't do something about elephants in our zoos, we won't have them. So what can we do? And we got together, we actually got together at Disney's Animal Kingdom, and we came up with a plan. And we think we have about 35 zoos that'll have African elephants and about 35 zoos that'll have Asian elephants. And we know that we can manage those populations for 100 years. But some zoos, like ours, to John's question, is we're with the older, we're sort of the senior citizens right now. We've got 4 females that are past breeding age, and while they could breed at that age, we found that if we breed an elephant past 23, 24 years old who's never had a baby, about 100% of them have died. So we don't breed elephants for the first time past 24 years. So we've got a few animals that are breeding age, and we're breeding those. San Diego, Lowry Park, Disney, Louisville, a bunch of zoos are breeding elephants, and we're going to create this self-sustaining zoo population. So as our animals get older and die, and by the way, people sometimes ask me, how many animals die at the zoo? And I say 100%. and so when our animals die, hopefully they'll be replaced by some of these younger ones that we're breeding. Elephants is pretty easy in a sense because by their average lifespan maybe 42 or 43, and elephants can live almost up to 60 years. So we don't need to produce that many babies. And that's a problem too, because we want to have natural herds with lots of females and babies all the time. But like there's no room in the wild, there's no room in our zoos. So we have to be very careful about what animals we breed and how many animals we breed. So the 5 that we have now is going to be wonderful. You're going to enjoy them. You're going to enjoy Big Willie and his 4 females. He'll be with them sometimes. He'll be without them sometimes, which is very much like in the wild. We may get a couple more for our herd, and someday we hope to have a breeding group, or as I talked about Disney, bring in a pregnant a female to go in with our group, and we'll start another herd. So someday we'll have, I'm sure, breeding elephants, but it probably won't be for a while. We all kind of have to take our turn. When we built the rainforest, we didn't have all breeding animals, but within 5 years we developed such a reputation, we became a real breeding facility. Thank you very much.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to a Friday forum featuring Steve Taylor, director of Cleveland Metroparks Zoo. Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.